Joining me to discuss this is the former chair of the BMA, the GP committee, Dr Laurence Buckman. Laurence, thank you so much for joining us. To be honest, this doesn't come as shocking as it is, the idea that people are waiting a month to be seen by a GP. It doesn't come as much of a surprise.
No, we expected it 5 years ago. We said it was going to happen. We said roughly when it would happen. The pandemic got in the way and just made it worse. But even without the pandemic, what you're seeing now is the dreadful result of years of under-preparation for the large numbers of doctors who were inevitably going to retire over the last 10 years.
All right, so you are saying it was inevitable and that alarm bells were being, rung and that the government wasn't taking any notice. So is it that we knew there weren't going to be enough doctors and we knew the population was increasing? Is it as simple as that?
Well, no, but that's at least the beginning. It was obvious from the number of doctors who came here in the 60s and 70s that by the time we got to the 2010s, we were going to run out of doctors because they were going to start to retire. And people like me, but many others, have been agitating for the last 20 years, warning that this was going to happen. We didn't predict that there would be an expansion of the population, and all that's done is make it worse. But it's not the patient's fault. It's the fact that we don't have enough doctors and nurses working in primary care to deal with the patients who quite reasonably want to be seen. And 17 million people waiting is awful.
OK, so we know we don't have enough doctors. We knew that a demographic tranche of doctors were going to retire, leaving a gap underneath them. Presumably, the answer to that was twofold: to train more Indigenous homegrown doctors and to encourage more doctors to come here from overseas. And yet what we're hearing is that even the doctors we are training here are going overseas. They're not even staying here.
That's right. Most GP trainees, that they're fully qualified doctors who are finally qualifying as GPs who can work independently, most of them take one look at what their seniors are doing and think, oh, I don't want that. And they can go and work somewhere else. Pay is an issue, but it's not really the big issue. The big issue is there's just not enough people working. And bringing foreign doctors from abroad, well, the biggest source of foreign doctors coming into the UK, which was from Europe, has been choked off. There are very, very few doctors who come in now from that source. So we just don't have enough doctors working and available to come into the UK or coming through the pipeline.
I was just looking at some figures today, and these might be a bit out of date, but the UK has 2.8 doctors per 1,000 population, so per capita, which puts us well below the European average, with only 4 countries in Europe having fewer doctors for the size of their population than we do. So we've been at the sort of bottom of the league table for some years now. And then when you look at the number of GPs who work part-time, again, there was a report out in the last couple of years showing that the average GP works 3 days a week.
Yes, that's because GPs, most of them, don't feel they can work for 5 continuous days, where a day is typically between 12 and 16 hours long. People like me were seen as dinosaurs, that we're actually prepared to do a very long day's work. The current generation of doctors don't want to work like that, and they look around the rest of the world and they don't have to. So what is trumpeted as efficiency, in other words, very few doctors per patient, per 1,000 patients, is actually not particularly efficient because it means people wait. It's a sort of austerity on doctor availability, if you like.
OK, so we've got fewer doctors doing fewer hours. And you said, obviously, the number of doctors is very important. But does pay come into this? Because, I mean, I can remember, I'm old enough that I was reporting on, was about 20 years ago, wasn't it, when there was a real blockbusting GP pay rise, which was thought at the time that that was going to secure the future of general practice because GPs had managed to get such a big rise.
Well, I don't want to go into history as one of the people that negotiated it, only to say that that was intended as a catch-up for all the years we've been used as a pay regulator for the rest of the economy. But let's just say money isn't everything. Money doesn't make you less tired. Money doesn't make you work much harder unless the amount of money would be ridiculously high, which is not on offer. This is not really about money. Once you reach a point of exhaustion, you're not going to go on unless somebody really does cross your palm with silver, which is not going to happen. This is the pay rise that we had was to keep the doctors on the field, but those doctors are now wandering off mainly into retirement.
Okay, so what is the answer? You know, people talk about the number of people who don't turn up for GP's appointments, and we know that Wes Streeting has been looking at Australia and perhaps Ireland, where people do pay a bit to go to see the GP. But given we've got a crisis with the number of GPs we've got, I can't really see, whilst I can see the sense in making people pay from a financial point of view and potentially from them not standing the doctor up, I can't see that that would be the solution to such a big problem.
I don't think many of us see that as an answer. Co-payment also has all sorts of political ramifications, and it discriminates against the poor and the chronic sick. So I think that's for politicians to discuss that. But for most doctors would say that what we actually need is a very honest discussion between politics and the people to say, you can't have what you want because there aren't enough people to deliver it. And the same has happened with every branch of medicine. As new treatments have come on stream, as new ideas emerge, the demand for those things appears out of nowhere, yet the resource, the workforce resource, doesn't expand. So the fact that you don't feel well and want to see a GP is completely reasonable. The trouble is there are not enough people, and we have to explain that. Not enough medical humans needs to be owned up to by the government. And then, obviously, the trick is to recruit and train more. But that takes 5 to 10 years to grow a new GP workforce. It's not going to happen overnight.
Well, exactly. And of course, whilst we're discussing what can be done and the fact there aren't enough GPs and they don't work long enough, potentially is not their own fault, but, the GP surgeries were meant to be staying open later and opening at the weekends, and none of that is really happening. But of course, meanwhile, there is a real impact on this because, I know from my own experience, I was with a friend just 10 days ago who ended up in an ambulance with me in the ambulance with her, and it was because she hadn't been able to see a GP. She'd been trying and trying and trying, and in the end it became a crisis and she had to go to hospital in an ambulance. And of course, again, we know a GP's appointment costs the country about 40 quid. What happened to her will have cost about 400 or even more with the ambulance, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So not only are you putting extra pressure on hospitals and A&E and ambulance because people can't see their GPs, you're making the nation sicker as well.
That's right. That's right. It's disgraceful. And we've been warning that this was going to come. You can't keep on with an elastic workforce expecting it to go on being elastic. At some point, you can't carry on seeing people. GPs are working flat out. The idea that we do 5 minutes and then go off to the golf course is that's ancient history now. Most GPs are working a 12 to 14-hour day, and they don't want to work like that. And it's not in patients' interest either. But the GP can't go on saying, well, I'll fit in another 5 or 6, because there is a point when actually the GP becomes unsafe because they're working too long. And what we need is more people able to see patients in the community. And we've expanded community pharmacy roles and enabled nurses to do more care for the patients. And we now accept the idea that there will be physicians' assistants, people who are not nurses and not doctors, but who can help people with some of their problems. And many advanced practices have social workers attached who can deal with things that are really not medical at all. But at the end of it, you have to say to people, I'm afraid the cake is too small for you to get your deserved slice. And that requires honesty amongst people who run the health service, by which I mean the Treasury. They have to own up to the fact there just isn't enough resource, by which I mean people. Yeah. If you just bung money at it, that will not solve the problem. You need workforce.
Yeah, the cake is too small and we don't have enough doctors. It's a simple problem to diagnose, but it is not a simple problem to cure. Dr. Laurence Buckman, thank you so much for talking it through with us this afternoon.